Good evening and welcome to tonight's webinar on the unique lived experience of adoptive and foster families. For those of you who are new to the Children's Mental Health Resource Center, I'd like to take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Elizabeth Errico and I am the Executive Director of CMHRC. Our mission as a nonprofit is to provide guidance and resources for the early identification and management of mood disorders, bipolar disorder, and a newly identified phenotype of bipolar known as FOH. The name of that phenotype is actually a thermoregulatory sleep dysregulation disorder, and we are on the cutting edge of providing education and resources around learning about and treating that new phenotype. In order to fulfill our mission, we provide a number of programs and services directly to families as well as to providers and educators. These programs include our palliative parenting classes. This is a unique parenting approach that was developed by CMHRC's mental health professionals in collaboration with parents of children who have mental health disorders, as well as adults with the lived experience of mental health disorders in childhood. We offer these classes every 9 weeks. Our newest round of face-to-face online Zoom classes began last week, and we have an on-demand self-guided video version of the course that contains all the same information that you can access at your convenience. We also have metabolic therapies that we support families in adopting, including our ketogenic therapy in action program. We've developed a web app for tracking symptoms, medications, diagnoses, the weather, the phases of the moon, all so that you can get concrete information on what symptoms are present, how severe they are, and how to address them effectively. We also have our Wayfinder services, which are high-touch, personalized support around diagnostic consultation, helping families understand diagnoses that have been given, and as well as to providers in order to help clarify complex cases of mood disorders when they present in childhood. We also have a community advocacy and consultation program where our Wayfinder members are able to get expert consultation with mental health providers to help them navigate the mental health care system. And we have interdisciplinary professional discussion groups to help professionals develop competence and mastery in identifying, diagnosing, and treating mood disorders in childhood and early adolescence. In order to do all of this amazing work and keep our fees either non-existent, like for these free monthly webinars and our free monthly clinical seminars, or at below market rates for our Wayfinder services to promote equity and access for as many people as possible, we fund our work through the generosity of our community. If you have attended some of our events, have been able to take advantage of our free resources, have experienced a discount on some of our services that have a fee, we ask you during May, which is Children's Mental Health Awareness Month, to contribute to our fundraiser. One-time gifts are deeply appreciated, and recurring monthly gifts allow us to plan for the future, develop new programs with confidence that we will be able to deliver them, and allow us to be nimble and adaptive to the needs of our community as time goes by. So we encourage everyone to make a gift during the month of May. This QR code will take you to our safe and secure online giving platform where you can make a one-time gift or become a member with a recurring monthly donation. I will show this again at the end, and so anyone who would like to snap the QR code at that point, you can do it then as well. In light of the fact that it is Children's Mental Health Awareness Month, each May we host a webinar that shares real-life, true experiences of the lived experience of managing mental health challenges in childhood. And so this month, our focus is on adoptive and foster parents and the journey that they have towards making sure that their children have the kind of mental health care that they need. And so this month, I'm proud to say that we have with us 3 adoptive parents who are also mental health professionals. And I'm proud to say this because part of our ethos at the Children's Mental Health Resource Center is that from our board to our staff to our dedicated volunteer corps, every one of us represents to some extent the lived experience of raising children with mental health challenges. And so tonight, the 3 wonderful folks that we have with us are both adoptive parents as well as clinical social workers. So they can speak to this topic from both the family viewpoint as well as from the professional one. As we go through our talk this evening, please do not raise your hand. We are in webinar mode and cannot invite people to come off mute or to turn on their cameras. So if you have a question, you can please feel free to put it into the chat or into the Q&A. If you have a comment that you want to add to the discussion, put it in the chat or into the Q&A, and I will be monitoring that as we go, and I will be integrating your questions and comments into the conversation. So please put them there. For anyone who is curious about how to get a certificate of completion or a certificate of attendance, you will receive an email tomorrow from Zoom that will have the link where you can purchase that certificate for a $5 preparation fee. And now, without any further ado, I would like to invite Angela and Alyssa and Jennifer to join us so that we can start this wonderful conversation. So what I would like to start out with here tonight is sort of the elephant in the room. When we talk about adoption, when we talk about foster care, we are also talking about trauma. We are also talking about stigma. And so I wanted to sort of just start out by addressing the fact that both of those things are there. They complicate treatment for mental health disorders. And I wanted to ask you each to sort of share a little bit about how you may have struggled in those areas with your children. Jen, why don't you get us started?
Sure. So, in terms of really getting services, it was the school system that I found the most challenging, and that was because they had their own testing, their own way of doing things, their own way of identifying things, even though we had had outside private assessments that they just really discarded. And there was sort of disbelief on my part of how could you do that when we had so much information from really great professionals in our community. And then there was someone who was brought in at a district level, and it was meant to reassure me or appease me. I'm not really sure. And she said, Mrs. Sevick, you need to understand that this never gets better. It only gets worse. And that was shocking to me because as a mom, that was said to me when my child was 6.
That's just awful. If I hadn't heard you share that in the past, my jaw would have been on the floor to hear you say that. Because not only is it cruel to say, but also very much untrue. And I think the folks that we have in our community are a testament to the fact that the dedication of parents pays off and our kids do improve. Angela, um, I want to invite you now to sort of jump in here and share your experience.
Yeah, I think for me, it's been an interesting dynamic because most of my children have come to me straight from the hospital. And so we ran into a lot of, oh my gosh, you're so lucky. You have gotten them from birth, so you're not going to run into any problems. And we could do a whole other webinar on that dynamic. But we don't have time for that today, because it's such a incorrect statement, that I was totally unprepared for as a parent, right? I wasn't ready for how incorrect that was, especially as my children grew and we ran into the mental health issues that came for that, but more so for how dismissive people were going to be when things started arising. But what that did to me as a parent when things started arising, because I was told, you're so lucky it's going to be fine. Okay, well, if I'm so lucky and it's going to be fine, then what does that mean? It means that I'm the problem. It means that
Mm.
I'm doing something wrong. And so it destroyed my self-esteem as a parent. It destroyed my self-confidence. And so it created this whole other barrier and aspect that shouldn't have been there. And so it was just this snowball effect of problems on top of the trauma that we were dealing with, on top of the mental health that we were dealing with. And it just became this whole other barrier that we didn't need to be dealing with.
It's so interesting to hear you say that, because I'm sure all of those folks who said that thought that they were being kind. But in reality, it was a disconnect from what the true lived experience of adopting from birth is like for parents. Alyssa, you've had a slightly different experience. Would you mind sharing?
I've had a different experience in the sense of accessing services within the community. It was the caseworker set things up for us, told us where we needed to get appointments, which we could get into very quickly in this rural area. So that was something that benefited us. But similarly to Jen, the school was the biggest barrier. I think us not knowing the IEP process and what we could advocate for. Um, and we were also told at our son's first IEP meeting when he was 4.5 that he will never talk, he will never run, he will never, um, I don't know, there's many things that they told us to just prepare for that he would likely never do. Um, and so which was really disheartening because he finally had people who had hope for him and believed in him. And so we kind of felt like we were up against a big barrier at the beginning, just trying to get them to understand that he actually has lots inside that hasn't been brought out yet.
Now, how old was your son when he came to you?
4.5.
Mm. So counterbalancing that with Angela's experience of bringing them home from the hospital at birth, how were you prepared, uh, perhaps differently from the way she was?
Um, I think that I can say that we were only prepared differently because of the work that we do.
Mm.
Um, I work in the mental health field, and so I kind of had an idea of what to expect in regards to uh, trauma responses and what to kind of look for.
Mhm.
So it's different in that way, I think.
So now Alyssa had a pretty great experience, you living in an area where you were able to access services and access them quickly. Was that your experience, Angela and Jen?
Um, it was sort of a yes and no, because we had private insurance. We did a private domestic adoption. It was considered a high risk, difficult placement situation. And but because we had private insurance, because I was in the medical field, and I worked at a medical practice, I always had easy entree into places because I was networking with these people. So I knew them. But when it came to BabyNet, and in every state it's called something different, but it's 0 to 3, you can have early intervention. That was where, at the point that he qualified for BabyNet services, where kind of the challenges began, because that is going into a different system. And they have their own way of doing things. And so, and their own way of seeing things and their biases about adoption. And so when we ran into that, there was some difficulty navigating those things.
Angela?
I don't know that I would say any of ours has been easy. I feel like I've had to use a lot of grit and determination to get the resources that we've needed. Um, Very early on, it felt like I had to do a lot of research, a lot of decision making in, okay, this is what we're facing, this is what we need. And nothing against our system. It's just the sheer fact that we have a lot of children in the system and few caseworkers that are far overworked. And it's just the reality of the broken system. And so it was a decision that I made that this is what we're doing and this is the heart and passion that I'm putting in. And so the need was there and I'm going to figure it out. So I surrounded myself with other people that were also going to figure it out. And so it was a community effort, for lack of a better term. I'm surrounding myself with these people who have these resources. In our state, Jen, it's called First Steps, 0 to 3 early intervention. And we found those people, we pulled them in. Recommendations that came to me, I sucked them in. If someone said, hey, I think this would work, I said, okay, let's do it. I built in the mantra of there is no such thing as too much help. If someone said, hey, I think this might be a good thing, all right, let's try it. Still to this day, it is a belief of mine. There's no such thing as too much help.
And it sounds like, Angela, that your experience was similar to mine in that you were your child's case manager. And that is the part that I found really surprising, because coming from a medical system, I was used to, as a social worker, being that case manager for other people, doing that care coordination between different disciplines, even different specialties. What I didn't expect was that no one was going to help me along the way, that I was that person who had to be the keeper of their history. And you do that as a parent, but to the point where you're informing them of medical things along the way, and every prescription that has ever been done, every intervention that has ever been done. I was just shocked at how things didn't follow along, and that they weren't always prepared or updated on the most recent things, and how much work that really took. That was really exhausting.
Jen, when I hear you say that, I think about the parallel that has for all parents of children who struggle with mental health challenges. That there isn't a part of our system that really is able to coordinate all of the care. Families, they have the teacher, and they have the school counselor, and then they have the occupational therapist, and maybe the speech and language pathologist, and the psychotherapist, and the psychiatrist, and the pediatrician. And all of these folks are sort of existing in their own little silos, treating one aspect of what the child is facing. And I'm wondering if sort of we see that as sort of a ubiquitous challenge facing all parents of children with mental health challenges. How would you say that it was different for you as an adoptive parent?
I think for me that I wasn't always believed or validated. Um, and especially since this was my first child and my only child. So it was kind of looked at like, oh, you're just a nervous parent, or that you don't know what you are doing. Um, and so things were dismissed. I remember early on, I was really concerned because my child wasn't cooing the way that the book said, like they should be cooing at this time. And I brought it to the attention of the pediatrician, who just literally was like, oh, they all develop at their own rate and in their own time, and don't you worry, mom, and that kind of belittling speech, if you really if I'm really honest about it. And then later on, when there was an issue, at 10 months, because he sure as heck wasn't cooing or making any sound, then the speech therapist was like, well, why didn't you bring him in sooner?
Alyssa, did you
I
have something
think
you wanted to add? Oh, sorry, Angela, go ahead. Either one of you.
I was just gonna comment on a similar. We always had an amazing pediatrician, but even so, I think that mental health concerns specifically were undermined, and I think that it was undermined particularly because we had had them since birth, and even though they knew the birth history, they also knew us, and they knew how he was being raised. And so they were like, oh, everything is fine. You're doing a good job. We know the care he's receiving. And so they were using that as this crutch of, he's just a boy. Well, that's great and all, but we're still seeing these issues, right? And unfortunately, what we do know is that love can't mitigate biology. And want, like we want him to be okay, but want doesn't fix brain development. Want doesn't fix trauma. And so our doctor really did, I feel like, do us a huge disservice by not offering the early mental health care that we really did need. And so I think similar to Jennifer is that they were a bit dismissive by not listening to us and our concerns, because they thought, oh, you're just worrying too much, or you're overreacting, because they didn't really take us seriously.
Mm. Alyssa, what were you going to add?
I was just going to add that one, I think having to have be involved in the foster care system and not being able to you're not I wasn't the one who could legally sign for anything or legally make any decisions. So there was always that extra step of having to call the caseworker or waiting on paperwork because they needed to approve it, which they usually would approve it, but it was just that's what probably delayed services
Mm.
is emailing emailing the paperwork, waiting for them to sign it so I could get it back, so then I could give it to the provider, so then we could move on to the next step, or we could start services. That was
So
just
it created a lot of extra steps to the process, whereas as a parent, you want to be able to just get the care for your child that they need. But in this set of circumstances, it layered into it additional legwork for you. And not for nothing, what we see across the board with all parents of children who have these struggles is that it's exhausting. And so to add that additional layer of effort onto you probably made that experience more exhausting than it needed to be.
And for us, there was this, and I had to learn this. There was a learning curve there. So we did a transracial we have a transracial adoptee, my son. So we're white parents to a black child, which means that also I was encountering unconscious racial bias, but not understanding initially that that was what I was running into, because these are educated people, right? These are educators, like teachers in a school. These are medical professionals, these are nurses. And then running into those things was always, and at some point it shouldn't be, but it's still sometimes, it's just so jarring. Like, oh, okay, I see what this is. And again, I wouldn't say that it is blatant racism. I would say that there is some internalized thoughts that they take as fact, when it's not, and some stereotypes, and then it comes out in their practice. And that was also hard, to learn that I have to advocate and I have to be alert at all times medically that this is something that does happen.
So I just wanted to pause for a moment here and sort of bring in some of the comments and questions that are coming in. A lot of folks are saying things like, "This sounds very familiar. We've been there." Talking about bias in the system that made it more difficult for kids who were in foster care to get the services that they needed. We have one person here who was wondering if you guys could give some examples of the services that you had to fight for, and how it turned out. Alyssa.
Uh, well, like I said, our services were I can't really complain too much about them. We had all the basic services that the county would set us up for and make appointments and things. But what was more difficult, I think, is being in the rural community that we are, is that there weren't many specialized services. And so if there was anything extra that I wanted, like outside of OT, PT, speech, and the psychologist, if there's anything else, that's what had to like I had to search for that and research and figure out why this would benefit and then talk to the county worker and say this is why I want to do this and then get the permission. So like music therapy, special needs gymnastics, were both things that I had to like work and search for.
Gotcha. Angela?
My son specifically was not diagnosed with autism until he was 9. We really started that process at about age 3. And we fought with medical professionals for all of those years. Um, Primarily, there was a lot of growth in those years, and we heard a lot of, but he's made so much progress, so he doesn't need that. He doesn't need that assessment. And so there was a lot happening in that time that we had to do. We actually had to go outside of our very large, world-renowned children's hospital to a much smaller place to get the assessment and diagnosis. Because, and so there was a lot of bias in that, and from those professionals, and they wouldn't do the assessment for us because they had seen him for so long and seen the growth in him. And growth is great, but that doesn't mean that he still didn't have the diagnosis and the struggles that he was having. But there is also to get even the services that he needs in school. I'm constantly fighting with him. He has very low IQ and very low social stamina because of his autism, but he has very, very high masking skills. So he can mask very well. And oftentimes you don't know that he's struggling. So you can be in a space with him for an extended amount of time and not know that he is having problems until he has large problems. And so the school is assuming that he can do the work and do fine when he really needs much more assistance. And so I'm sitting in front of them saying he needs much more assistance. And they're saying, but he doesn't, because he'll sit quietly in the back of the room and not cause problems, and which is great for them. But he's not doing the work. And so I'm constantly having to fight with them and say, he needs more accommodations. And so it's a constant battle when outwardly they're presenting one way, but they really need more accommodations to get the assistance they need and be successful.
And so we have someone here in the comments who's sharing that that it is difficult to find that these additional services outside of, as Alyssa pointed out, outside of OT and PT and speech, in part because there isn't necessarily a ton of knowledge within the community of providers about what the options are and where they can be achieved. And I also do want to acknowledge something that has been shared. People are expressing a little bit of surprise at the not so positive experiences that you all have had within the school system. And I do want to acknowledge something here in that every district is different. And, we've spent, I think, collectively decades working with schools trying to get them to provide the accommodations and interventions that kids need when they live with mental health challenges, when they live with trauma, when they live with um, experiences in their life that require them to have additional interventions. And the truth is, in my experience as a mental health professional and as a parent, that in every district, what matters is the individual staff member that you're working with. When that individual staff member has the child's best interest at heart, it truly wants to make a difference, these things happen. The change that the child needs occurs. And when that you cannot find that special staff person who is willing to go the extra mile for your child, it is extremely difficult to buck that bureaucracy. So I want to acknowledge what has been shared by some folks in the comments, that yes, there are countless fantastic, fabulous school personnel out there. And when you find them, they are worth their weight in gold. But that it is, despite that, extremely difficult for families, especially when they are dealing with a lot of unconscious bias, to find that jewel in the district who is going to meet them where they are. And I know from my own personal experience that I've experienced both. I've had school personnel who were absolutely doing what was wrong for my child and sticking to it. And I've had the school personnel who I will be eternally grateful to for the work that they do. So we're certainly not making blanket statements about everyone who works in a school. We have many educators in school, special services staff members in our community. We adore them. But these are the true life lived experiences of families who have struggled with that aspect of getting their child the services that they need. And yes, absolutely, staff shortages go into that. We see that throughout the mental health care and educational systems, that when you have 40 kids on your caseload, it is very hard to give each one of them everything that they need, and that more staffing and better pay is a key to making that transformation happen for our families. We have a question here. Someone saying, from prior to adoption, were you part of any foster parent support groups? And did you have any contact with any other foster parents?
So I'll say that from my experience, I ran them. So it wasn't necessarily participating in them. It was being a guest speaker, helping them through different things like trauma, helping foster parents to recognize things about domestic violence and sexual abuse. And so it was very well versed and steeped in that. But because it was a private infant domestic adoption, I was not required to do any of those things. So it was just fortunate that I had a background in that.
Angela?
I also was very well, Jennifer's word, steeped in foster and adoptive support groups. It was actually my position as well. I was a leader of them, but I was also very much involved in them in the foster care community of my state. Not just because it was my job, but because it was my passion to make sure that foster parents understood that they weren't alone. Before we adopted, and still, I think isolation is one of the biggest problems when it comes to the foster care and adoptive community. Feeling like you're the only one on this journey, feeling like you're the only one whose kid just punched a hole in the wall. Same with the mental illness community. When you feel like you're the only parent whose child is doing this, it's suddenly defeating. And it is there is no possible way that I could have been a foster parent for 16 years without the groups that I was part of. And that's the one thing that I wanted to make sure that other parents had. So, yes, I was part of that. I still, even though it's not my job, even though I'm no longer an active foster parent, am so active in because I want to make sure that parents know that they have support and that they are not alone in this journey because it's hard stuff. It's not easy.
Yeah. Alyssa?
We had requirements that we had to meet. We had to attend so many different support groups and education groups per month, per year, um, which were nice, but I don't the our situation with the things that we were dealing with Cameron did not seem to be the same as what other people were dealing with. So, like we kind of were the only ones that had a kid who punched a hole in the wall, and so the support groups not were not necessarily very supportive because they just didn't understand the level of anger that Cameron could experience. Or so there was that. I sought out support services through a different group, the Autism Community in Action group, and that was more helpful and more supportive than just the local foster adopt groups.
You're really highlighting this sort of really important piece very well, which is that there are the challenges that foster and adoptive parents face. There are the challenges that parents of children who live with mental illness face. And then there's the unique experience when those two things cross, when there's an intersection. And that perhaps finding a space for yourself in the foster parent community or in the mental health and mental illness parent community, you may have felt like there wasn't really a spot for you in either place because you were experiencing this intersection of symptoms.
Yeah. Yes, we ended up going to it was just something that we had to do and that took time away from things that we needed to do. And it wasn't really, yeah, supportive in that sense.
Hmm. We have a comment here from someone who says, part of my isolation comes from the comments people make. Society doesn't understand adoption. I feel often like people don't see my child as my child, and instead that she's a charity token. Among other things, I worry about the mental health issues my daughter will face just due to the comments and stigma. Any of you have a response?
Yeah, that kind of happens wherever we go. And we just had to learn and to have a thick skin. And really it was about educating my child. And that was unfortunate because he was so young. And so people would ask him questions about his family that they had it wasn't appropriate to ask a young child those questions. Whenever we were around, the conversation about foster care, and we wouldn't know these people. We would just be like at a beach or at a park, or they would just start talking about foster care. And I'm like, well, he was never in foster care. Like I'm thinking it, and I'm not involved in their conversation in any way, but it would just come up. Or people would say, wow, I could never take a child away from their family, or I don't have enough money to buy a baby. And so it's those kinds of things that come up that's I always try to think it's not intentional, that it's out of ignorance, and that they're not involved in this community. But it was very unfair and very unfortunate that I had a young child. And often they didn't think he was part of our family. And so if we were going somewhere, I remember we were on this hayride and they're only letting so many people on. And so it was like, we all kind of loaded up, and then there was my son because they didn't think that he was part of our group. And so it's always like those are learning things that we had to learn along the way of like to make sure that he was always included and that it was always known that he was with us. And it was just a learning curve that we had initially.
We have a comment here that this is sounding very familiar to some folks in our audience who are grandparents who are raising their grandchildren. That there's a sort of similar that lack of realization of like, oh, you are the parent, even though it doesn't look the way people are expecting it to. Angela, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was this is usually what I say in my closing, but it fits nicely here. Um, Truly, this journey of like foster care, adoption, mental illness, is a journey of grace and forgiveness, and it's a journey of grace and forgiveness for multiple people. It's a journey of grace and forgiveness for ourselves as parents, because we're not going to do it right every day. Quite honestly, we're going to do it subpar most days, mediocre at best, right? Because we're not going to get it right. But we're going to keep digging. We're going to keep trying. We're going to keep learning, and we're going to wake up the next day and do it again. And we're going to fill our bucket with grace and forgiveness for ourselves. We're going to need grace and forgiveness for our kids because this is going to be hard stuff. We're working with kids from trauma. We're working with kids with mental illness. And all of that is brain changes, and brain changes mean big emotions and big behaviors. And so we need grace and forgiveness for that. But to the speaking of what they mentioned, like we're working with greater society who doesn't understand. And so we need grace and forgiveness for them because they don't get it. They don't know what trauma is. They don't know what mental illness is. You know, maybe if we just parented a little harder or we put more stickers on the chart, they would get it. They would do better. They would act better. They wouldn't cry in public, right? But we know that's not how it works. So we have to fill their bucket with grace and forgiveness. And all of this is just part of the journey. And so it's all about grace and forgiveness. And we just have to wake up and fill the bucket again and again. But it's hard stuff and it's not easy. But what I remind myself and I remind my community again and again is that we can do hard things. And we can do hard things because we're not doing it alone.
I want to, and this is also usually part of my closing, and we're not closing yet, but I wanted to sort of piggyback on that and say, I think that's part of why at CMHRC, we focus so much on community building and on giving families a community and a place to come where, whether they're children were adopted, whether their children are part of the foster care system, whether they're their biological children, whether it's their grandchildren that they're raising, or they're raising the child of a family member as their own, that none of those distinctions really matter to us in terms of exclusion. It matters to us in terms of the influence that it has on your daily lived experience, but it doesn't matter to us in terms of segregating people and saying, well, you're not part of our community. We really look at it as the more the merrier. We, as Angela said, there's no such thing as too much help. And so our goal is to be there to help and break down isolation for as many families as possible. And in keeping with that, we have next week, just so everyone knows, and again, we're not ending, but it seemed like a good time to mention that next week on Tuesday evening, we're going to have the first of our Wayfinder follow-ups to the webinar. Our thoughts here are that you come to the webinar and you hear us talk, and then next Tuesday you can come for a smaller group to actually discuss and come together as a community. So at the end, we will be putting up a QR code that you can use to register for that meeting on Tuesday, where Angela and Alyssa will be there to talk with you directly about the things that we discussed tonight in the webinar. So getting back to one of the questions that came up here, folks are asking about treatments that were out of the box, like equine therapy or swimming lessons or music therapy that worked and what didn't work. And that sort of leads into my next question here, which is, what were the supports that you received that worked? What were the things that you engaged in that helped you get through up until now and continue to help you get through moving forward? Jen?
So ours was truly outside the box because traditional therapies, whether it be play therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy or um, the trauma therapies, none of those things were really, they weren't appropriate at that given time because he wasn't stable and he wasn't necessarily available to participate in the way that the back and forth needed to happen. So the thing that was the most therapeutic for us, it was actually involvement in the community. And so he had soccer and he had a small, very small school. And those kids lived in our community. And so he was able to have friendships and socialize and be on like a rather regular rhythm. And we were very lucky about that. And so we have these routines, and that was the thing that helped us was community involvement and engagement, as well as like traditionally occupational therapy and physical therapy. But it wasn't until he was much, much older and that he was more available to participate. And that's when he found that really the first one that he connected to was DBT, and it really spoke to him. And so it just happened to be that that was the thing that spoke to him. But again, he was older by that point.
Angela?
Ironically, what I've found with all of my children is their most consistency is inconsistency. So the things that work for a short time and then stop working. We have used equine therapy, and that has been really beneficial. Unfortunately, it's really hard to be consistent with. I do live in Kentucky, so equine therapy is easier to come across, but I don't have horses in my backyard. So that is something that we have been able to do, but not on a regular basis. With my daughter, we have implemented ketogenic therapy through the CMHRC, and it was so amazingly beneficial. I was skeptical, I'm not going to lie. Someone says, hey, change their diet. And I'm like, what are you talking about? But the improvement that we saw almost immediately was absolutely amazing. Now she's a teenager, so is that easy to do? No. Is it easy to maintain? No. But it is something that doesn't require medication. It's something that doesn't require me having to go to a doctor for. So it's a lifestyle change that is able to implement in our home. And that was really cool, for lack of a better word, to be able to do, and to be able to teach her that, hey, this is something that you can do. This is something that you get to control. This isn't something that a doctor has to tell you about. And watching her learn that has been really, really powerful. So I think that for us, learning the lifestyle changes has been the most beneficial. Teaching my children that the way you live affects how your body feels. With my son, the thermoregulatory piece this is something new that he's learning. This is something new that we're learning, that like, hey, when your body gets really hot, you get really angry. So we have to help control that. And helping him figure that out, helping us figure that out, has been a big learning curve. But watching him try and figure that out and watching all of us together learn how to control that has been a really significant piece as well. So stepping outside of the clinical box, all of the things that I learned in the books, and really learning those other pieces has been really neat, and really kind of learning outside of the box, I think, has been the most beneficial pieces in our life.
You're really talking about what we talk about all the time, which is the fact that every day is a little bit different and you're making these adjustments as you go to what's going to work in that moment. I always say to parents, it's what works is what matters. Let go of the rest. Alyssa, what would you like to share?
I would say the traditional therapies, our son was nonverbal for quite some time, so a talk therapy was not going to work for him. And there were um, not many play therapists in our area, so that was not really an option either. And he was not stable enough to be in a situation like that. Like, we were basically discharged from PT, OT, and speech at one point because he was too much of a risk to the other kids who were in the area. So that was frustrating because those were services that he needed to mitigate some of those symptoms sometimes, and they were not willing to kind of step up to the plate to help when it was the hardest point in time. Um, Music therapy, gymnastics, swimming, those were all very helpful. Unfortunately, in a small area, in a rural area like this, they don't stick around for very long. So a lot of those services, we don't even have them anymore. So they come to like an end, an abrupt end. I mentioned the autism support group that I was a part of, which was more helpful than the traditional foster care adoptive support groups. However, that was also, we got to a point where it was just not, it was not a fit anymore. Like, we tried the gluten-free, dairy-free, soy-free diet. We tried the natural supplements. We tried homeopathic things that group was all recommending, and that was worked great for their kids, and their kids are in recovery. And so we're really hopeful, but that didn't work. That ended up not working for us. And then we were again left to this, like, oh, what do we do? Um, and then randomly, because of where my father-in-law was working and who he was working with, um, she came to work one day and looked distraught. He asked her what was wrong. She told him what happened with her daughter that morning. And he said, "That sounds like my grandson." And then he connected the two of us, and she had, in the middle of the night, I think, had come across this CMHRC in the middle of the night because she was just searching and searching and searching on the internet. And so then that's how I got connected to it. And this has probably been the most understanding group, the most supportive group. And once we implemented the ketogenic therapy, I've probably seen as well the most progress. But even prior to that, like getting on the right medications and finding a provider who knows about fear of harm, or other providers who are willing to learn about fear of harm, then we kind of got on the right track with the right medications. And now I too, Angela, when I first heard changing the diet, I was like, okay, yeah, we've done that. Right. We did the gluten, dairy, soy. We got rid of all that and it didn't make a difference. But yeah, the ketogenic therapy has been huge, and we've been able to reduce a medication actually.
Wow, that's fantastic. So much optimism there.
Yeah. So if you would have asked me a year ago, I wouldn't I wouldn't have had the same we wouldn't be at the same place, let's just say.
And
Wonderful.
so many parents who come to us, and that's why we created palliative parenting, because we took what was working. Some of us were experts in the mental health field, and in mood disorders in children, but some of us were what we call professional parents. And so what that means is that we recognize that they're an expert in their child. They have knowledge and insight about the conditions that their children are living with because they're observing their child all the time. and they're reading the literature and they're following current things. And so we all came together in collaboration and we're like, let's put together an approach that works. So it is evidence-based, and also it recognizes something that is so unique because in other approaches, um, it's in order to help your child not get into crisis, and that is the goal, is to keep your child out of crisis. But there's one famous psychologist who says, well, once your child is in crisis, this approach isn't going to work anymore. And so we recognized some of our children live in the land of instability, because we're trying to adjust medications because of growth and development, and then we've got to adjust medications again, because sometimes it's difficult for providers to even recognize the correct condition that that child lives with. And so if you can't recognize that, then you're not going to have access to the appropriate treatments. And so sometimes what happened for quite a few members of our community was that palliative parenting was the only intervention that they had available to them. It was the only community that they really had that was available to them. And so that for so many of us at CMHRC has been really instrumental in being able to continue to move forward with confidence.
So someone is asking for more information about palliative parenting. Palliative parenting is CMHRC's unique parenting approach. We teach classes in palliative parenting. They are 9 weeks long. They are face-to-face over Zoom once a week for 9 weeks, or we have an on-demand self-guided video course that contains all of the same material that's presented in the face-to-face course. It's just available to you at your convenience, so that you can, as Alyssa mentioned, her friend, you can look at it at the middle of the night if that's the only time that you have for yourself. And folks are asking in the chat about family members, spouses, siblings, grandparents who don't understand, and may not be listening when you're telling them what you know is going to be best for your child. And what do you do? How do you manage that? Well, one of the ways you manage that is you get them to take the palliative parenting course. We have lots of parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles who come and take the class so that they can learn how to use this approach that is not about looking to fix the child, but to nurture the child and help them improve their quality of life, and accept them for who they are and who you are as a parent. So, Jen, I want to circle back now that we're coming to the end of our time. I want to circle back with you to what you said at the very beginning about that school administrator who told you that things were only going to get worse. They were not going to get better. And to ask you how they are now, all these years later.
Yes. So and what's interesting is that I actually have a background where I attended IEPs and 504s for other people. So I had extensive training and all of that, and knew she was not correct. But currently, my son participated in a documentary that we hope is going to be out in 2025, which features a number of people living with bipolar, and he is one of the only ones, I believe, that speaks his truth and his lived experience about what it was like to be diagnosed at age 6 and growing up, and his experiences in the community and within the school system, and what that was like for him. He is very proud of the work that he did on that, and with the team. The production team was amazing. And also, he won an award through our local Mental Health America chapter for his bravery in coming forward and being able to share that. He likes to speak whenever possible to others and to share his experience. So he has been interviewed a number of times, and he paints really well. He is, and he hasn't had any formal training, but we are working with a very well-known local artist who has agreed to work with him when he has an opening for formal training. And he wants to be able to go into the mental health field. That is his goal. He has read the DSM every page um, and carried around a pocket DSM with him wherever he went. That was a little embarrassing sometimes. And he wants to be an advocate from the lived experience because he believes that that's so important. And he really wants to educate teachers, other parents, coaches, um, anybody out there where he can say, this is what happened to me. And I'm hoping that somewhere along the line, you can have a similar experience where things went well, because certainly they did along the way. We had some great medical professionals for sure. And then also for the things that did not go so well, he would like to be able to make a difference so that there can be some changes made along that way.
So I'm going to share now with our audience some pictures that your son has created to show the beauty of his of the beauty of his artistry. If we go back and move this out of the way so that you all can see his incredible talent and the fact that anyone who looked at him as a 6-year-old and said, "Ma'am, this is not going to get better," was surely very incorrect.
And
So the work that he does, the advocacy that he does, the outreach that he does, he is a remarkable young man.
And the picture of what looks like the sun is not the sun, it's actually a neuron in the brain. And so he's just very connected. So the picture of him, it's like in a depressive episode, the ballet was more of just like an inner free spirit, and then the neuron. So he's very in his art. He likes to be able to bring out whatever is inside of him.
Absolutely, absolutely beautiful. Um, and now that we are wrapping up, we're running out of time. I can see that we have so many folks who have written into the chat and the Q&A additional information that they wanted to share and questions that they wanted to ask. And I'm so sorry that we're not going to be able to get to all of them. But I want to invite all of you who have more questions, who have more comments, and want to connect with this community of ours, to use this QR code that is on the screen right now to register for our Wayfinder discussion group that will be next Tuesday evening. It goes from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern time. So that is 6 to 7 p.m. Central, 5 to 6 p.m. Mountain, and 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern time, Pacific time, to join us. Alyssa and Angela will both be there to continue this conversation in a more intimate setting with individuals who want to continue the conversation and find a community that they can call their own. I also want to encourage anybody who's interested in more information on palliative parenting. You can go to our website, cmhrc.org, or to the palliative parenting website at www.palliativeparenting.com in order to find out more information about how to take either the live class or the on-demand self-guided video course. I want to thank each and every one of you for being here with us tonight. This is an important topic, and we want to keep this conversation alive and give families who have this unique intersection of adoptive, foster care, and mental illness. We want to give you a place where you can find solidarity, commiseration, hope, and resources for the future. So thank you to Angela, to Jennifer, and to Alyssa for being with us tonight to speak to these issues as you have lived them. And thank you for sharing your experience and your strength and your hope with us. So thank you for being here. I am going to pop up onto the screen one last time for everyone. The QR code for our fundraiser. If you appreciate the free resources we have to offer, if you've been able to take advantage of one of our discounted services for families and professionals, now is the time to show your appreciation with either a one-time gift or a recurring monthly gift that supports all of our programming for families, for schools, for mental health care providers, for anyone who makes it their business to be there to support and help children survive, thrive, and grow into their potential. We are happy to collaborate with everyone who has that goal. So again, please feel free to use this QR code to make a gift. Next week on Wednesday, we will be having our monthly clinical seminar. We will be taking a deep dive into the thermoregulation that is associated with the fear of harm phenotype of bipolar, otherwise known as thermoregulatory sleep dysregulation disorder. In that, we will be talking about the science behind thermodysregulation and the way in which it impacts symptoms of bipolar disorder and likely other mood disorders as well. So feel free to register for that on our website under our free resources tab for clinical seminars. Next month, we will also have our monthly book club. We'll be meeting to be talking about specific therapeutic models that are designed to treat bipolar. So thank you again for being here. You can reach us through our website, cmhrc.org, or through our YouTube channel, our Facebook page, and our Instagram page. So we look forward to seeing you again at another one of our events, hopefully soon. Thanks, everyone, and have a great night. Good night.